back, everyone. And now with the panel discussion about the importance of environmental, social, and governance, ESG, in the capital markets, with Mr. Turki Roueli. Mr. Turki Roueli is the spokesperson, PR, and communication director at the National Development Fund, with 12 years experience in marketing, strategic communication, raising awareness, and media relations, in addition to creating and changing the mental image of governmental and private entities. Mr. Turki is known for leading the establishment phase to the communication, customer service, and call center departments in several entities. He holds a master's degree in communications and information management from Bay Bath University, Longmeadow, Massachusetts, United States, and a bachelor's degree in administrative science in the field of marketing from King Saud University in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Mr. Turki, I will leave to you the honor of introducing our guests today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. I have with me here Dr. Ahmed Al-Darwish. He is the Deputy Governor for Development, Economic Research and Policy Advocacy at the National Development Fund. Also, I have Dr. Abdullah Al-Abdelkarim, and he is the Executive Director of the Enablement Sector at the Government Expenditure and Project Efficiency Authority. And also I have Dr. Al-Walid Al-Sheikh, and he is the Minister Advisor from the Ministry of Investment. And finally, I have Mr. Bandar Al-Blehid. He is Clients Relation Development Head at the Saudi Exchange, known as Tadawun. Without further ado, I know you are here for my guests. My guests are very well known. No need for me to introduce them or go for their bios. They have a lot to give. I have myself actually learned a lot from our previous discussion and preparation for this session, and I encourage you to buckle up for a very interesting session. Dr. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abu Rahman, for this introduction, and hopefully this session will be useful for everyone. And also thank you, Dr. for this opportunity to participate in this important, actually, conference, which I hope everyone will benefit from. To understand, actually, the ESG and how it came to affect, to influence the capital market, financial market, it might be useful to shed light on some of the incidents, some of the global initiatives that has already sort of, I would say, formulate how ESG even impact the way that we see the future of investment. And if you allow me, just a little bit probably about the concept itself. The concept came directly from the other original term, which is the socially responsible investment. And that one probably goes back more than 3,500 years, when some certain groups, social and religious groups, started to, I would say, instill some beliefs and values in their members and followers, such as that prohibiting any financial transaction, include alcohol, sort of firearms, or anything like tobacco. Those are products that conflict with values. So it is there, and then with years comes a lot of incidents that have happened. So probably I remember 3 of these incidents or events that happened, particularly in the US. One of them, the public demand that put pressure on the governments, and in particular the using universities' endowments. So how it should be used. Should we use this university endowment wisely and invest it in something that is, makes sense and logical? Or it should be sort of preventing universities from investing in military and war support. And this is one of the public demands. Other public demands came into effect with the Community Reinvestment Act that was issued in 1977 in the US. It was more or less about how we support people living in low-income neighborhoods and in terms of health and safety and others, so they can really more or less be provided with essential services. The other major incident, which is more or less environmental incidents, is the partial meltdown of the 3 Mile nuclear plant in Penn State. That really spurs a lot of fears about environment issues that might have affected health of neighborhoods and others. And then a forum called Forum for Sustainable Responsible Investment came to life. Those incidents, together with some major initiative led by the UN, and I remember one of those initiatives is the joint initiative between the UN, Swiss government, as well as the IFC, the International Finance Corporations, when they start more or less a ground-up analysis, and they started together and all of these regulators, financial sector experts, to more or less, I would say, incorporate ESG in investment strategies. And that's where the ESG came to life, because there has to be a move from only socially responsible investment to more or less, I would say, specific concepts, which include environment, social, as well as corporate governance. And that initiative from the UN, it helps actually set the stage for ESG framework later, because there were actually two reports. One report is called, I think, Who Cares When? Everybody can access this report. And there is another report issued also 20 years ago. It's more or less a fresh fields report, which is more or less law firms and financial sector and institutions, more than 1,700 of these institutions get together to analyze if we engage or incorporate ESG into financial and capital market, how that would be impacting the social and as well as the sustainability. But more than this, it was about financial relevance. So then another frameworks came to life to more or less help in the implementation. One framework, it's more or less about the principles of social responsible investment, and this was also issued by the United Nations. Another one is the Sustainable Stock Markets Exchange, SSE. Those two were more or less on the implementation side to improve the transparency as well as accountability. There were also another initiative, or 3 initiatives. One is the SASB, the US SASB, which is more or less an accounting standard. The other 2, it was more or less on the reporting standards. One is the GRI, and again, those all accessible online from the UN website. The other one is the establishment of the International Integrated Reporting Council. Of course, and I think the previous session was on the SDGs in 2015, when SDGs were launched by the United Nations. This gave the comprehensive framework, I would say, where ESG probably seen as a subset, but the way I see it is more or less these two, ESG can be a subset and also can be sort of a support to achieve the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. I hope with this I cover most of the historical part. I don't want to take more of my time. I know I exceeded 5 minutes. But yeah, back to you, Abu Abdurrahman.
Thank you, Abu Isa. Very interesting. So ESG, it's something not new, even though it's accelerating these days very well. Dr. Abdullah, I know you are from Expro, and it's obvious that Expro review the projects that government entities are doing. If you can tell us more about how how Expro does that and how that affects especially the governance aspect from ESG.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rahman. First of all, I would like to thank Princeton University for hosting us in this conference. I'm very excited to be here and shed light on Expro, which is the Government Expenditure Efficiency and Project Authority, which is a government entity that helps to meet fiscal balance inside the government, meaning balancing between the government spending and the revenue generated, which is right now called Fiscal Sustainability Program. We at Expro try to enhance the government spending and improve the impact from government spending and the return on the spending. And in order for us to do that, we have developed what we call a program, sustainability program, that is based on the best practices to improve the maturity of government entity to implement sustainable practices in different aspects. The program is called Spending Efficiency Key Element Program. It's a program developed by Expro with support from our successful partner from different government entity. The program is based on EFQM, which is the European Framework for Quality Management, and the OECD performance-based budgeting. The program overall measures the capability of government entity to meet spending efficiency targets using a gradual manners, and it helps government entity to identify the gaps and the area of opportunity so that government entity can capitalize on them, and then they can develop initiatives to improve their spending in a sustainable manner. Initiatives can be, for example, changing how they consume electricity using sustainable manner, or implementing solar panel, or maybe in a project defining the need of the project, how the project is impacting social, economical, and environmental factors. And maybe let me give you some background in the program that is developed by Expro. It's an ambitious program made of 5 pillars. The first pillar is the strategic and leadership pillar, which measures how the government entity leadership implementing sustainability in terms of spending efficiency. Is sustainability and spending efficiency embedded in the entity's strategy? Do they have their own target? Are they recognizing their employee to implement spending efficiency? And are they spreading awareness inside their entity? This is the first pillar. The second pillar is the government entity practices. Practices can be in a project, how they are implementing a project. Do they conduct value engineering? Do they conduct capacity and demand study? Or it can be in procurement. Are they implementing the best practices in a procurement that are available in the new government and the procurement law? Or it can be in human resources as well. It can be, for example, are they using the best practices in human resources? For example, do they have manpower planning in their hiring and so on? So the program covers all practices that the government are doing. The third pillar of the program is the ability, the capability of the government entity. Do they have the right capability and the right training to implement the best practices? Do they know how to do capacity and demand? Do they know how to do spending efficiency reviews and so on? So this is the third pillar. The fourth pillar is the initiative. Based on the practices and the capability, have they developed the right initiatives to improve their spending? For example, the right initiative, again, can be implementing, reducing their electricity consumption, improving their project utilization, or, for example, improving their O&M practices. And then the last one is the result. So those initiatives that are developed by government entities, have they achieved the right result? Have they reduced their cost or improved their efficiency without impacting the quality of the service that are delivered to the nation? So currently the program is being implemented by 200 government entities. Great successes have been made by government entities. Those entities have developed almost 2,000 initiatives, ranging from different spending elements, with financial saving estimated at 39 billion Saudi riyal. In terms of practices and sustainability, we have government entities have achieved 20% improvement compared to last year. This is just a quick introduction how we are mandated to improve the spending efficiency and the sustainability in the government. Back to you, Dr. Rahman.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. Indeed, actually, making sure you are efficient on how to spend is one very important element that ESG is covering. Dr. Al-Walid, if you can tell us about I know there is a several rating for ESG. There is several entities that does the rating for ESG. If you can elaborate more on that, and if there is any rating for the kingdom or for the company, if you can tell us about that.
Yes, sure. First of all, good morning, everyone, and thank you to the university for hosting us today. So just to take a step back before we go into the rating issue, because I think it's an issue that is of interest to me at least. Why are we discussing ESG? Why are we discussing ESG now? Why haven't we discussed it 10 years ago? I'm sure that Dr. Ahmed had said it's really old, but we haven't been discussing it. So why discuss it now? I think it's good to understand a couple of numbers, which I hope can show you why people are really interested in talking about ESG. So at the banner of ESG, if we look at assets under management in the financial industry, these are remarkable numbers. Today, in the US alone, about 25% of assets under management have some kind of ESG mandate. When you look at Europe, the number is even larger. It's about 17 billion. So in the US, the 25%, 26% translate to about 12 trillion. So it's 17 trillion in Europe, 12 trillion in the US. That's a huge number. And the only thing we're seeing now is that it's really not driven by the individuals, as you said, anymore. If you look at the numbers and look at them and break down these numbers, you'll find that the majority of that drive has been coming from institutional investors. So the pension funds, the sovereign wealth funds, and these are huge, huge funds. So they've been going to their asset managers and saying, listen, yes, you're managing my assets, but don't go looking just for return. We have other responsibilities that include the social, the environmental, and the governance. So what has that caused, in a sense? It has caused a big chunk of available finances around the world to be limited to those who care and show their information and provide disclosure on ESG issues. And that, by definition, creates a problem. And in fact, it has created a challenge for some countries and some entities. There are two biases we find in the literature of ESG, two main biases. One is developed country biasness, and the other is big corporate biasness. By those two biases we mean, because now, when you invest as an asset manager, you have to know what the company or the entity you're investing in, whether it's government debt or even a company that you're buying equity in, how do they have the ESG disclosures? Do they actually disclose their information when it comes to social issues, diversity within the company? We see a lot of women here in this room. So the diversity in those companies is very important, even in boards. So it's not just having governance requirements as you have in Tadawul, it's having diversity in that board itself, that counts. And of course the environmental issues as well. So the biggest challenge is the information available? So when you go from the well-developed market who have been ahead in this, into emerging markets, emerging markets have been waking up to find that they're deprived from the capital markets of huge amounts of money, not because they don't necessarily have diversity. They may have a very diverse workforce and may have a very diverse board, but they fail to disclose it. So there are two elements here. One is the actual facts of the company, and the other is saying what you have in the company. And that's where I think some of the entities in regulating disclosure have made sure that they tell the companies, and I'm sure Brenda will talk to us about it, on how these companies should disclose their information. What I will close with is the challenge, and we'll talk about it subsequent to this 5 minutes, the opening 5 minutes, is the challenges we're having. And now we've spoken about the challenges from the company's side, right? But there are other challenges which are very important and still evolving, which are the rating agencies' challenges. So, if you're looking at debt instruments, and you look across the debt issued, which we call green debt, if you like, which falls under the banner of ESG, the ratings of those debt instruments are not too far away from each other. So they correlate. If you go to 3 rating agencies to rate one issuance, debt issuance, they would most likely, evidence have shown, that they wouldn't rate them very differently. Where's the challenge when we go to equities? That's the big challenge. There's a recent paper by the OECD that shows 5 rating providers rating 10 companies. And they put them in one chart. And you can see one company being rated as the worst in a certain provider, the worst in ESG score, and the best in another provider. And that variance, when they actually calculated what we call the correlation, the R value, if you're familiar with statistics, was less than 50%. What does that mean? It means that 50% of the time, those ratings for the companies disagree with each other. And for people interested in academia, I think that's a huge challenge. Because if you don't have consistent, comparable information, how can you make a conscious investment decision? I will elaborate later on it, but I personally would like to hear also from Brenda, who works in the disclosure requirements, how challenging that is, unless he has something else in mind to talk about.
Absolutely. Indeed, actually, disclosure and from our previous talk with Mr. Bender, and how disclosure and how Tadawul actually has been set up the guideline for disclosure. If you can tell us, Mr. Bender, on that, and how Tadawul actually evolving on that, and what's actually the future for disclosure.
Sure. First of all, let me thank you for the introduction. Thank you, university and the organizers, for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure to be here and listening to all of these experts. I'm learning a lot here, and I hope you do too. First of all, let me say that the Saudi Exchange, we are very passionate about ESG and sustainability, and this is something in the core of our long-term strategy. Well, because we are one of the top 10 largest stock exchanges in the world, and we are the most liquid in the MENA region. So we have responsibility towards our issuers, our investors, and the community as a whole. Having said that, also I concur with what Abu Sara says. ESG is not good to have anymore. It's a must. We've seen it time and again. Indices that follow ESG companies are outperforming the ones that are not. So asset managers, institutional investors, and even retail investors, millennials are looking into this. They're more responsible right now. So it's very important for us to look into it. There are many challenges in the ESG landscape, which is ever evolving. Obviously, what Abu Sara says is very important right now. There is no set standard globally. Countries are looking into it differently. Private investors and private entities are looking into it differently. So our goal at Tadawul and the Saudi Exchange is to make sure to make these things easier for our investors and our issuers. So that's why we have issued our first ever ESG disclosure guidelines back in late 2021. And by this, I would say this is the ignition, the key, the start to help our issuers start disclosing their work when it comes to ESG. It's worth noting the kingdom itself is moving towards sustainability. Obviously, the Vision 2030 sustainability is a key pillar of that. But even the latest announcements that we've heard in the past couple of months, the Saudi Green Initiative, the Middle East Green Initiative, the promise to go renewable or 50% renewable energy by 2030, and these are great initiatives, and we look forward to facilitate these to our issuers. We see ESG as an opportunity and risk mitigation. There is a huge risk. I mean, let me tell you a story. There is a very big furniture company in Europe that sources plastic from a company here in the Middle East. And they told them, listen, you have to make sure that the plastics that you provide to us is sustainable. Lower energy use, lower emissions, the people at work are compensated well, and you work for your communities, or else we will stop their duty. And that company had to do it. So there is a risk if you're a company in the region that deals with investors, that deal with other vendors outside the region, they will demand this from you. So this is the risk mitigation. The opportunity comes from the investors. The institutional investors, they're putting more and more of their investment pool into that. I mean, Bloomberg predicts a 5-fold increase when it comes to AUM within 2025. That's humongous. Again, it's not good to have. It has been proven. In 2020, we've seen companies that are ESG compliant are now more resilient. They took the wave of the pandemic really well, and that gave proof of concept to these companies that this is something that they need to work on. Now, having said that, it's worth noting that Saudi companies, they do a lot, specifically on the G, the governance, and the S. Governance, why? Because we have obviously the Capital Market Authority, and this is very well regulated, very clear. If you see the rating agencies that Absar was talking about, when they look at the companies here in Saudi Arabia, they're always highly rated on the G, but they're missing out on the S and on the E. And why are they missing out? In many cases, because they're not disclosing. And this is where we come in as TADAW. We sit in a very unique position where we deal with index providers, we deal with rating agencies, institutional investors, whether local or international. We deal with the local, regulatory environments, the CMA, the SAMA, the ministries, and we try to make sure that we understand the landscape, make sure that the companies, we facilitate their help to disclose. When it comes to social, for example, the numbers are staggering when we see Saudi companies in terms of women participation in the workforce. It has increased tremendously. When we see training and retention, so not only to the communities, but also within their organizations. So we're more than happy that we have started this, and we look forward to the future. Hopefully we look at it to be more and more developed. Just the last bit I want to say, from 2020 to 2021, the number of Saudi companies that started issuing ESG disclosures have doubled. And now this is a trend we like, and we'd like to see it continue in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nader. Back to you, Dr. Ahmed. Sustainability, I know you are an expert in economy.
Not really.
Sustainability has been criticized
Right.
due to its vacancies.
Right.
You cannot measure sustainability. Where ESG, you can measure, there is some elements that there is some standards, there is some manuals, some authority has been developed all over the countries. So, is ESG taken over sustainability, or can we say ESG is a tool for sustainability? Are they complement each other?
Right. It's a bit tricky question. I don't know, you're trying to move me out from my comfort zone, but I'll try to answer the question a little bit from probably what I have engaged previously in ESG and investing. The simple answer is ESG itself probably can be seen as a risk mitigant, risk management, more or less. So you identify risk, manage it, mitigate it. There are sort of framework that usually used by investors and analysts where they have sort of negative screening or positive screening. That itself feed into something called more or less impact. The impact, what we try to formulate it, is the sustainability at the end. So you can see it that ESG is more or less risk mitigation, risk management. Sustainability is about impact on the short term and long term. So it's more or less they do. I know there are some discussions and confusion between sustainability and probably other goals, and especially when we discuss the comprehensive framework of this SDGs. But ESG is very concise, specific on three factors: environment, social, and corporate governance, which is more or less about assessing risk and managing risk and how to mitigate it. And the sustainability is impact, more or less. It feeds into that one. This is how the way I see it. Probably other experts might disagree with me, but I've been trying to convince myself that probably sustainability is vague a little bit, but it's not if you look at it this way.
Thank you, Risa. Abu Sarah, is there a difference when we want to apply ESG for a private equity company and listed company?
So we've been having huge challenges when it comes to listed companies. Private equity is even much harder, because if you can think about the listed companies, it's much harder, because at what level of disclosure do you want to go down? So you've got small and medium enterprises, and disclosure has a cost associated with it. If we're having difficulties with the listed companies, my understanding is Saudi Arabia doesn't mandate anyone even in the listed company sphere, they don't mandate the companies to issue those ESG disclosures, at least till now. I hope that changes very soon. But when you go to the private equity sphere, and this is not just in relation to ESG, all types of disclosure. I don't know if we have any accountants here. The accounting standards for non-listed companies, the governance standards for non-listed companies, they differ hugely. But that puts a pressure on the policymaker. And how does that make it relevant to your work or mine as people who work in public service, and maybe to academics as well? Maybe I'll start from an example. Once a firm, I work for the Ministry of Investment, so we had a meeting with a firm that was managing assets for people outside of Saudi Arabia. And I sat down with them, this is maybe relevant to you as well as Dr. Abdullah. I sat down with them and they said, our investors are asking us questions that relate to disclosures of information in relation to ESG. And they were talking about listed companies at the time, and they could see the difficulty at that period. I mean, let me just give it an historical perspective. Back in 2020, we had about 15% of listed companies, if I'm not wrong, correct me if I am, just 15% that issue information, these are listed companies, that issue information that is related to ESG. What they're doing in Europe now and in other countries that are ahead of us is that they're not just thinking about making it compulsory for the listed companies. They're trying to go down the ladder of private equities. And that, in a way, will open a lot of sources of funding from the ever-growing chunk of ESG assets under management to those private equity firms. So if you want to ask me from a public service point of view, I hope from now we look ahead even far and further from the listed companies into the private equity sphere. And the challenge is, why do these indices, now go back to the indices, why do they differ? Because E is huge, S is huge, and G is huge. How much do you weigh each? And even when you say how much do you weigh each, what are you focusing on? I think emerging economies, emerging market economies have to campaign through academia, through international organizations, to focus more on the delta, on the change, rather than on the level. Because if we keep focusing on levels, the biases I talked about earlier of of big economies and developed economies will always be there. They're much better than us, even though we're much better in the Delta. So if you think about Saudi Arabia, for example, many other countries in the emerging economies sphere, the change element is amazing. And I think this is where ESG could make a difference. So if you can put more emphasis on the change and invest more in the change, the impact that Dr. Ahmed said, I believe, will be achieved much, much more efficiently.
Thank you, Abu Sara. Back to you, Dr. Abdullah. Ensuring the sustainable consumption and production is the 12th goal of the SDG. Can you tell us how Expro make sure that consumption for the government entity is efficient?
Well, there are many methodologies that have been developed and implemented within government entities to review their consumption and how they spend their budget. One of them, for example, matching their request with the need and how the need is measured and assessed. Matching, for example, their requirements with the local requirements and others. Let me give you maybe an example on how consumption of electricity, as an example that is related to sustainability, has been done with one of the government entity as a success story. We have been working with the Saudi Energy Efficiency Center with certain government entity to improve their consumption in relation to electricity. University of Al as an example have developed what we call as an energy management program, where they developed certain initiatives to reduce their consumption, and they have trained their staff, they spread awareness, they retrofit their building, and because of their initiative, they achieved about 15% saving, 10 million riyal saving in 1 year. This is one of the success stories. Other success stories that is done by SWIC, which is Saline Water and Conservation Corporation, they are working to reduce their consumption in, let's say, their water production facility. They have achieved about 1 billion riyal saving in 2021 by implementing new technologies that consume less electricity. There are so many success stories that are carried out by government entities because of implementing efficiency practices. Back to you, Dr. Rahman.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. Mr. Bender, ESG is evolving, and it's an investment for a company. They spend money to comply for ESG. Should they do that? Why should they bother to spend money to follow ESG guidelines?
Absolutely.
Where it's not mandatory.
Absolutely, I think that's a very good question. And just to go back to Wasala's comments, yes, we've seen that the number of disclosures in Saudi Arabia and in the region is weak. Actually, it's an emerging markets phenomenon, and this is due to a lot of things. And I think one very important aspect that we need to look at is that we cannot be compared with the standards of developed countries, but we have to have our own standards. We have to make sure that their perspective of what we do is changing. A lot, for example, when it comes to the S or the E, they look at, Saudi Arabia is an oil-producing country. They're doing a lot of harm to the environment, but on the other hand, you see that Aramco or Saudi's, emission per barrel is the lowest and the most efficient in the world. So we have to make sure that this image comes out. Even when it comes to human rights, and they say, okay, look, those skilled workers don't earn enough, but they don't see that they're actually earning 3 times more than what they earn in their home country. They don't see that they're actually bringing billions of dollars to their economies back. So this is a perspective change that we have responsibility to do. And as Tadawi, we work a lot with those international institutions, with exchanges and index and rating providers to help shape that image. And again, it's a very evolving landscape and things change quickly. In fact, one of the items, CAPSARC and the Ministry of Energy are working on the circular carbon economy. What an amazing concept that works well for all producing countries. And it's backed not only by Saudi Arabia, it's backed by Russia, by Norway, by the US. So it's huge. So it's great to see that we're not only passively getting the standards and we comply, but we also look into providing our input to these things. So when it comes to your question and why should companies do it voluntarily, it's because it's the risk of missing out. Right? If you don't do it, you're going to miss on investments. You're going to miss, and honestly, we can see the young generation, they are very responsible when it comes to not only investing, but buying products. And you can see it in any product everywhere. You can see that we are a sustainable company, we are a sustainable product. So it's important to work on that. The second thing, it's growth. You will have more and more potential investors and more potential buyers. The third thing that we're also looking at is cost reduction. You're going to be very efficient when it comes to energy usage. You're going to use less energy, you're going to spend less. Otherwise, if you're not efficient, you're going to use more. The risk of regulatory changes, whether locally or internationally, as I said before, there is a risk that your vendors or your customers outside the region might demand something from you that you cannot do right now. But if you have it set as a strategy, it's better. Again, we've seen Saudi companies that have issued, one particular company, they have issued their ESG disclosure back, I think, 2017, and then they stopped. They did it once. I remember I spoke to the company, why did you stop? I said, to be honest, it was an initiative by one employee, and he left. So that's why it's important to incorporate it into the strategy. Top-down approach from the board, and then going down, making the governance structure internally to make sure that this works well. Again, ESG, as Basara said, it's about data. Provide the data, and let the investors see. Because if you say, one of the arguments comes is that, I'm afraid, if I disclose this information, I'm going to be looked at negatively. And McKinsey actually did a study, only 8% of these disclosures are looked at negatively. The vast majority is positive. Because if you don't disclose, it means that you're hiding something. So that's why it's important to look at this.
Thank you, Mr. Bender. I want to open up the floor if there is any question, or I can go on with my questions. All right. Abu Sarah, if you can. There is a question.
I can see the guy here.
اتفضل.
Hello. I just want to know about the rating agencies for ESG and which Tadawi works with, and how does the stock exchange guarantee the objectivity of the rating for its customers and investors?
Absolutely, it's a good question. When it comes, we actually work with the largest when it comes to AOMs, when it comes to the number of investors that are looking at, and the largest that provide the data. So I can name names, but I will not stop because there are lots. The biggest, obviously, the MSCIs, the FTSEs, and the S&Ps, the Sustainalytics, and the list goes on. So we work with them to make sure that Saudi company representation in these ratings are actually high. So we've seen some of them, they only covered, for example, 40 listed companies. But we've seen that in the past year it became 70. And we hope that they will reach the 200 plus in the future. And we're helping them do that. Actually, we tell them what are the challenges that you're facing. Some of them, they do it by surveys. They send out surveys to the companies. And that companies, they have to fill it and then get back, and they will do all of these things. So we speak to these companies, we advise them actually. Not only on providing them information, we offer advisory, full-fledged advisory service for free to all the listed companies. So we're not going to passively wait for them, but we're going to reach out and tell them, listen, are you interested in ESG? We will help you develop the strategy internally. We will help you disclose those information. We will help you, those index providers. Some of the companies approach us and say, listen, I want to be on MSCI's ESG Leaders Index. How can I do that? I say, listen, fantastic, great to hear that you're interested in this, but this shouldn't be your ultimate goal. This should be a consequence of what you're doing on ESG. So this is one thing. When it comes to objectivity, for us, it's what I said before, it's making sure that our viewpoint as an emerging market, as the region, is looked at in a balance to those. One of the largest Nordic, I'd say, investors we had a meeting with, and they said, listen, we will not look into the Saudi ESG landscape as strictly as we do to Europe, because it's not fair. For me, what I want to see is initiative. I want to see companies actually start working and developing and promise that they will do a lot when it comes to ESG, disclosure-wise or strategy-wise. So this is a good thing to see, a good thing to hear. This is what we try to promote to the listed companies.
Busara, if you can talk about the future of the government role on ESG here in the kingdom.
Okay, so I think before we start talking about the role of government, let's think who are the stakeholders. I mean, seldom you'll find people talking about ESG without relating them to SDGs and what have you. I think there's a role by academia, definitely, and we're in a university today. I think there has to be a lot of work done by academics to positively criticize the status quo and make sure that the direction goes into a direction of positive effect, right? Rather than limiting access to finance. I think the international organizations have a role to play. Because if you think and put the World Bank hat on, for example, and they've started the initiative of sustainable development and finance, right? The SDGs and the goals. One of the main mandates of the World Bank is to ensure that poor countries get help and support and get access to finance. Now, some of the unintended consequences of the current divergence in ESG ratings and the emphasis on the use of rating is that what happened is actually those countries who are least developed have been deprived of that type of lending. So there has to be some, and I talked to the World Bank once about it, and I said, you must provide some kind of advice to governments, some kind of a manual, a roadmap to governments who can't hire very expensive consultants or bring in the best minds in the world. Those poorer countries, you should play a role in making sure that they do at least the bare minimum to ensure that they don't, because of ESG concerns, don't get access to finance, right? So that brings us now down to the government level. I would say what I wish, but just to make it clear here to everyone, we see it in our day, and some of the students working, as I see here, will be working for maybe our ministry, PIF, NDF. The NDF, for example, has a pillar in its strategy that relates to ESG. PIF, if you Google it, have just signed a strategy, they've announced a strategy, they haven't published it yet, that makes sure that our investments in Saudi Arabia are at least partially ESG compliant. That goes all the way into most government and private sector entities. If you haven't read enough about ESG, I really think you should take at least an hour or two and just try and understand how big this is. Because in your future careers, I guarantee you will face questions about ESG, wherever you work. So let me finish by saying what I hope we can be, and that relates to, I think, something Benda has said. I personally want us to be dreaming high and wanting to stop thinking of ourselves as not a developed country. Why can't we think of ourselves as demanding ourselves to become part of the dialogue? And what happens, and unfortunately I'm going to say this is a personal opinion, so it's quite subjective. Countries like us are responsive. We react. Why don't we be proactive? We've spoken now about the private equity. They're now developing it in the UK and in the requirements of private equity, private firms, non-listed firms. Why aren't we talking about it? And I'm happy to say that within the ministry, we're trying to push, as public servants, to at least consider doing that now. So the hope is that we become more proactive, and because when you do, you get involved in the discussion. You don't just get to implement what people have discussed. I'll stop here.
Boris, what's the future of ESG?
Well, I'm not gonna say more than what Sarah already mentioned. The future is here and it's growing. In terms of asset, as Sarah has stated, 30 trillion already, and probably is going to be, as analysts expect, it's going to be around 53 trillion in 2025. There are forces, factors from the government and factors from an institutional sort of, I would say, investors. So these bottom-up, top-down factors that impact how investors are going to behave, how the portfolio is going to be increases in ESG, it's all there. Adding to what Abu Sarah and Bandar has said, and also Dr. Abdullah, is the technology aspect of that. How its technology is now helping ESG to be part of the larger investment portfolio. One example is the AI. I read a report about how AI now is helping analysts to identify those sort of stocks relevant to ESG. So it's not only disclosure that I'm going to wait for, I'm going to look to how AI is going to help me assess that company is more compliant to ESG or not, in particular to the environment and product specifications. So it's really increasing, and because of the AI and data, sort of big data involvement in that, I think the acceleration is getting faster and faster. That's why we expected that the jump from 30 trillion these years as an asset under management to 53 in just 4 years. All of these factors come together to help and direct this money to that direction. So as Abu Sarah said, I'm encouraging all the students here, please, if it's AI, consider how you're going to use your AI also in financial aspect. If you are majoring in any environmental, social sort of any management fields, focus on these three elements, and hopefully the future is here to stay, and we are part of that journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Abdullah, in 2 minutes or less, the future of ESG.
Well, I believe it has a big future to be implemented in the government and the private sector, as the speaker has mentioned. I think in the future, all government projects should be assessed with an ESG, and this is actually part of the assessment that we carry on here. What are the environmental aspects of every project? What is the financial impact? What is the feasibility study? Environment can really look at different things like CO2 emission and other factors, pollution and so on, energy consumption. What are the alignment of those projects requested by entities with the strategies of entity or within Vision 2030 strategy? I think it will play a big role in the assessment. Definitely it's an area for students to learn about and capitalize on the opportunity that they have here. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. Folks, there you have it. You have now become an expert in ESG. I encourage you all to learn more and read more about ESG and how important is. I saw there one hand, if you have a question. Yeah, please.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm Dr. Zainab Rawashdid from CBA. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm teaching business ethics and corporate social responsibility. I'm here with my student. I'm very happy to that we are part of this lecture. What we are studying theoretically in our class, we can find it here in the lecture from, mashallah, well-experienced people. They can incorporate the information, connect it, link it to the vision of 2030 as we do in the class. I have two questions. The first question, as you said, one of the stakeholders now are students, society, academics. I'm trying to do my best, CBA, our best, they offer these classes, but how could you help our student? MashaAllah, as Mr. Bandar said, now some organization, it's an initiative from one employee. Our students now are familiar with corporate social responsibility, corporate governance, initiative about sustainability. Is there any initiative, internship that our students can benefit from or be aware about to be a part with your companies, start maybe training, co-op with the companies, practice what they have learned or learn more. For our class, they have a project they have to do about ethical program, social responsibility program. Is there any help or support they can gain to improve this and be, they are the future and one of the most important stakeholders, help in these organizations?
And the second question?
These are the
Only one?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, please.
So first of all, thank you for the question, and I wish that, and I'm sure that you will install in your students and through the lectures and what have you, the importance of looking at business ethics. What I can tell you is, and this is something I planned to talk about, and I seem to have not, is what are we doing in the government? We've said in general what we aim and hope to do, but I'm at liberty to say two things. One is internally. I know we're pushing internally at the Ministry of Investment to have a vision, and I think we made the distinction between country-level ESG and debt issuance ESG and equity ESG. And at the equity level, we distinguish between listed companies and non-listed companies. Let's keep it at the top level for now, so at the government level. And I looked at one country just recently, two months ago. They had a website dedicated for the story of ESG of that country. Now, what I thought was, and I could be wrong, but what I thought was when I read that, I thought, we have a good story to tell here, especially in the last couple of years in Saudi Arabia. We have a good story to tell. Are we telling it enough? As a public servant, especially working in the ministry like the Ministry of Investment, where you get to, I'm an economist, so it's dealing with what we call asymmetric information, so trying to make the information available to the decision maker at the private level. What I'm saying is this is what we're doing, and to answer your question is I really don't know how can this benefit you and your students. Maybe there ought to be a visit we can organize. I'm sure the ministry will do it, and I'm sure other organizations here will be happy to host and to work with universities. I come from a university. I used to teach in a university, so I'm sold case. But I really don't know. I'm just telling you what's out there. The last thing I want to say is that because the nature of ESG is too wide, one of the biggest challenges in it is there's no central entity, right? That you say, ESG, it's that entity. No. And that's a challenge. From a government's point of view, it is a challenge. So now there's effort by the government, and I'm at liberty to say that, to engage all of the relevant entities from public service entities that work, whether you have the National Debt Management Center and other government agencies, ministries, and Ministry of Finance, our ministry, to put them in one room and say, not from the perspective of MISA, Ministry of Investment, the perspective of NDF, the perspective of Tadawul, what can we as government entities have a unified perspective and come up with a strategy, a vision? Where do we want to be? Because without a strategy, we're not going to go anywhere. And maybe some kind of communication with academia, especially students and what have you, can benefit us. We can learn from you and your students and vice versa, hopefully. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
If I might add, Doctor, the last question we had is what is the future of ESG? I think your students are the future of ESG, inshallah.
That's why we want some initiative to include them.
Absolutely. I think one of the key challenges in the region and in Saudi Arabia is the lack of talent in the space. There is no experts. And what universities such as PSU can do is to develop this, this amazing structure of ESG in general and sustainability. I invite you and your students to come to Tadawul. We're more than happy to showcase what we're doing, to showcase what the market is doing, what are the efforts, and how can your students, CSR obviously is a huge part of that, but expand the knowledge. This is, if I was your age, this is definitely the direction I'm going to go to. So I wish you all the best of luck. And again, let's speak soon and coordinate and see what we can do for you. Good luck.
May I add also, please, you as academic here, probably His Excellency Lecturer here as well, do outreach. Don't just do research and sit down in the university and that's it, and publish it in one of those journals. I haven't seen a lot of sort of outreach from academia to the sort of government. It's more or less science. You do research, you publish it, yes, I get promotion, associate professor, and then what? I've seen this, to be honest, in the academia. So do outreach, because sometimes I don't know what you're doing, guys. Yes, I look at your website, but it would be much better if you do sort of a roadshow sometimes and go and visit those government entities who have some relationship with your own research. It's going to be great, actually, from your side. So maybe we are not really, we're super busy. Dr. Walid was telling me that he hasn't slept well last night because he has to work on a project. So we're very, very busy, but we will make time for you if you come and visit and say, look, we have this research, we have this agenda, we need help, or we would like to get insight from your side as a practitioner. So please do the other side as well. Thank you very much.
And most government entities actually, they are open for students, for tours, as Abu Sarah mentioned, or for 1 to our workshop to joint research as well. In terms of partnership, internship, that's usually handled by HR because sometimes these type of employment things and regulator. But in terms of just visiting and exploring and knowing what this entity or that entity does and what you guys are doing inside the academia world, this is part of my job of organizing. I have been reached from several universities, not BSU though, at NDF and at my previous work as well. We can organize that for you and exchange, the knowledge and help develop those students. I'm afraid we are running out of time. I would like to thank Prince Sultan University for organizing this and thank Dr. Abdul Hakim Al-Majid, the Dean of College of Engineering, and hopefully we will meet on like this events and learn from each other. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.